when one man became an army of ghosts. This 3-day feint broke their plan. This is not a metaphor, nor the stuff of legend. This is a verified, documented feat of psychological warfare and sheer human endurance that unfolded in the shattered forests of eastern Poland in the late summer of 1944. As the colossal forces of the Soviet First Belarusian Front surged westward in the wake of Operation Bagration, crushing the German Army Group Center, thousands of fragmented Wehrmacht units were caught in a deadly, chaotic retreat. Amid this maelstrom, in a dense woodland known as the Parchu Forests, a single soldier, separated from his unit and presumed dead, would wage a war of illusion. For 72 relentless hours, he would transform himself into a phantom menace, convincing an entire German rearguard battalion that they were being hunted by a large, skilled partisan force. His solitary, desperate actions would create a critical delay, a bottleneck in the German withdrawal, allowing advancing Soviet spearheads to close a trap on hundreds of enemy troops and vital equipment. This is the story of one man's will to survive, weaponized into a strategic deception. To understand the sheer audacity of this lone stand, we must first journey to the volatile and bloody ground where it occurred, and meet the man at the heart of the ghost story. Our story centers on Corporal Jan Janek Krzysztof, a 24-year-old scout and sniper of the Polish 1st Tadeusz Kosciuszko Infantry Division. This division, formed under Soviet command and part of the broader Polish People's Army, was fighting its way westward alongside the Red Army, tasked with liberating Polish territory. Janek was no rookie. A farmer's son from the Lublin region, he possessed an intimate, almost spiritual knowledge of the dense, marshy woodlands that characterize this part of the country. He was a man of few words, with calm eyes that missed little, and he carried with him not just his standard issue Mosin Nagant 1891/30 sniper rifle with its PU 3.5x scope, but a deep, personal hatred for the German occupiers who had ravaged his homeland. The strategic situation in late August 1944 was one of sweeping Soviet momentum. After the catastrophic destruction of Army Group Center, German forces were in a headlong retreat, trying to establish a defensive line along the Vistula River. The Parchu Forests, a sprawling area of old-growth oak, pine, and boggy lowlands, became a conduit for these retreating units, a place where order broke down and isolated groups of soldiers from various shattered divisions coalesced into ad hoc battle groups. Janek's unit, the 2nd Infantry Regiment of the Kosciuszko Division, was operating on the southern flank of the main Soviet advance. On the morning of August 27th, his platoon was ordered to conduct a reconnaissance in force towards the village of Milano, which intelligence suggested was a temporary rallying point for a German rearguard. This rearguard was identified as elements of the 73rd Infantry Division, a once proud formation now reduced to a desperate, fatigued collection of perhaps 500 men, supported by a handful of horse-drawn wagons, 2 operational Pak 40 anti-tank guns, and a single KFZ 251 half-track. Their orders were simple: hold the Forest Road junction near Milano for as long as possible to allow larger retreating columns to cross the Vipers River, 10 miles to the west. For Janek and his comrades, the mission was to probe this force, gauge its strength, and report back. They moved out at dawn, a gray, damp mist clinging to the pine needles. They had little idea that before the day was out, their routine patrol would collapse into a desperate fight for survival, leaving one man alone in a sea of enemies. The initial contact was sudden and brutal. At approximately 0930 hours, Janek's platoon, moving in a loose skirmish line through thick undergrowth, stumbled directly into a well-camouflaged German outpost. The staccato crack of a German MG-42 machine gun tore the morning silence apart. The initial burst cut down 3 Polish soldiers immediately. Chaos erupted. The Polish platoon leader, Lieutenant Boric, shouted orders to fall back to a pre-designated rally point. But German mortar rounds, pre-registered on likely approaches, began to walk through the trees. Dirt, wood splinters, and shrapnel filled the air with a deadly hail. Janek, positioned on the platoon's left flank, found himself partially separated. He saw his friend, Private Tomek, fall, clutching his leg. As Janek moved to aid him, a mortar shell exploded in a towering geyser of earth just 20 yards away. The concussion was physical, A hammer blow to the chest that knocked the breath from his lungs and sent him stumbling into a drainage ditch. For several minutes, he lay stunned, his ears ringing, the sounds of the firefight muffled and distant. When his senses cleared, the character of the noise had changed. The sharp, close-quarters cracks of rifles had given way to the deeper thumps of grenades, and the shouted guttural commands of German troops moving through the woods. His platoon was either dead, captured, or had executed a full retreat. He was alone. Peering cautiously over the lip of the ditch, Yannick saw 2 German infantrymen, their field gray uniforms smeared with mud, methodically checking the bodies of his fallen comrades. Fear, cold and sharp, coiled in his stomach, but alongside it, a hunter's instinct took over. He slowly, silently, brought his Mosin Nagant to his shoulder. The scope's crosshairs settled on the lead soldier. He exhaled slowly and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report was deafening in the confined space. The German soldier dropped. His companion spun, firing his carabiner 98K wildly in the direction of the shot, before diving for cover. Yannick did not wait. He slithered backwards down the ditch, then rose into a low crouch, crashing through the undergrowth away from the scene. For the next 2 hours, it was a nightmare game of cat and mouse. Yannick moved with a desperate grace, using every fold in the ground, every thicket, every fallen log. He could hear German patrols fanning out, their calls to one another growing increasingly frustrated. By 1200 hours, a light, chilling rain began to fall, soaking through his uniform and turning the forest floor into a slick, silent carpet. He knew he was cut off. The rally point was miles away, and the Germans now controlled the area between him and his lines. His only advantage was this forest and the contents of his pack. 80 rounds of 7.62 Krim-R ammunition, 4 RGD-33 fragmentation grenades, a small canvas bag of hardtack, a canteen, an entrenching tool, and his most prized possession, a German potato masher stick grenade he kept as a trophy. He also had his knowledge. He recalled from the pre-mission briefing that there was an old forester's hut, marked on the map as abandoned, roughly 3 kilometers to the northwest. It was a slim hope, but it was a destination. As he moved, his mind shifted from simple evasion to a more calculated form of survival. He was behind enemy lines. His mission of reconnaissance was, in a sense, still valid, but to survive long enough to report anything, he would need to become more than just a fugitive. He would need to become a threat. By late afternoon, the rain had steadied into a persistent drizzle. The gray light was fading early beneath the thick canopy. Yannick, having circled wide, approached the forester's hut with extreme caution. It was a low, log-built structure, partially hidden by overgrown juniper bushes. It was not abandoned. Through a grimy window, he saw the flicker of a lantern and the silhouette of a man in a German uniform, a dispatch rider, perhaps, using it as a temporary shelter. Yannick's options were vanishing with the daylight. He needed shelter, and he needed intelligence. He crouched in the dripping bushes, his mind working. A direct assault was foolish, but a distraction. He carefully unscrewed the cap of his canteen and took a long drink, stowing it back. Then, with deliberate slowness, he prepared his first move in a one-man war. He crept to the far side of the small clearing surrounding the hut. He took one of his RGD-33 grenades, armed it, and with a powerful, underhand lob, sent it arcing through the trees to land with a thud in a thick patch of ferns 40 yards from the hut's front door. He then immediately moved, circling silently back to his original position. Pause. The grenade's explosion was a stunning, concussive crump that shattered the forest's wet silence. Birds erupted from the trees. As Yannick hoped, the door to the hut flew open, and the German soldier emerged, rifle raised, peering into the gloom towards the sound of the blast. His back was to Yannick. Yannick rose from the bushes, covered the 20 yards in a silent sprint, and brought the heavy steel butt plate of his Mosin down on the back of the man's helmet. There was a dull, metallic clang, and the soldier collapsed. Yannick quickly dragged the unconscious man inside, securing him with his own belt and gagging him with a strip of torn blanket. A quick search yielded a treasure trove. The soldier's MP-40 submachine gun with 3 loaded 32-round magazines, a Luger P-08 pistol, a detailed map case with marked German positions and withdrawal timetables, and, most crucially, a dozen more stick grenades and a box of signal flares. On the rough wooden table sat a half-eaten loaf of black bread and a can of meat. Yannick allowed himself 10 minutes. He ate ravenously, studied the map under the lantern's glow, and formulated a plan born of equal parts desperation and brilliance. The map showed the German battalion's main defensive perimeter around the Milano crossroads, less than 2 kilometers south. Their planned withdrawal was set for the night of August 29th. 2 days hence. He now had a target, a timeline, and, most importantly, new tools. He was no longer just a stranded scout. As he extinguished the lantern and melted back into the rain-soaked darkness, leaving the bound soldier alive, he began his transformation. He would become not one man, but many. He would become an army of ghosts. Dawn on August 28th broke over a forest shrouded in thick, spectral fog, a gift from the weather that Yannick embraced fully. The German battalion at the Milano crossroads, already jittery from constant rumors of partisan activity and the looming Soviet threat, was about to have its worst fears realized. Yannick's strategy was one of orchestrated chaos. He would strike from multiple, seemingly unrelated points, using noise, light, and carefully timed attacks to suggest a coordinated force. His first act was one of psychological priming. Using the captured signal flares, he moved to a ridge east of the German perimeter, just as the gray pre-dawn light began to filter through the fog. At precisely 0545 hours, he fired a single green flare high over the German positions. To any watching German sentry, a green flare could mean anything: a signal to advance, a marker for mortar fire, a recognition signal for a partisan group. It was unexplained and, therefore, threatening. He then immediately displaced half a kilometer north, waited 20 minutes, and fired a red flare. Confusion began to ripple through the German camp. Officers were roused from their brief sleep. Sentries strained their eyes into the impenetrable white mist, seeing shadows move in every shifting tendril. Yannick then began phase 2. Using the MP-40, he approached to within 200 yards of the westernmost German machine gun nest, its crew nervously scanning the fog. He fixed the weapon to full automatic, braced it against a tree, and unleashed a long, roaring burst in the general direction of the position. The distinct, ripping sound of the Schmeisser was unmistakable. He then immediately ceased fire and ran 50 yards to his right, pulled the pin on a potato masher grenade, counted to 3, and hurled it in a high arc. The grenade detonated with a flash and a bang in a clearing well away from any Germans, but the effect was perfect. To the machine gun crew, it sounded like a brief, intense firefight had just occurred between 2 unseen elements in the fog. They reported contact to their command post. Within minutes, a reinforced squad was dispatched to investigate. Yannick, meanwhile, was already circling south. He used his Mosin now, finding a good hide overlooking a muddy track used by German patrols. He waited, as the patrol from the west passed below, searching in vain for the source of the earlier noise. He carefully aimed at the last man in the column. The sniper's shot was a single, sharp crack. The soldier fell. The patrol dove for cover, firing wildly into the fog in the general direction of the shot's echo. Yannick was already gone, having slithered backwards into a creek bed, the sound of the water masking his retreat. By 1,000 hours, the German battalion commander, a Major Schreiber, was facing a mounting crisis. His field telephone lines to outposts had been mysteriously cut in 2 places. Yannick had located and severed the wires with his entrenching tool. He had received reports of flares, automatic weapons fire, grenade blasts, and now a confirmed sniper kill, all from different sectors of his perimeter. The fog made aerial observation impossible and patrols hazardous. The logical conclusion, drawn in the tense command bunker, was that a sizable, well-armed partisan group, perhaps in coordination with forward Soviet scouts, had infiltrated the forest and was encircling them. Major Schreiber, fearing his withdrawal route would be ambushed, made a critical decision. He canceled all planned reconnaissance patrols towards the east and instead pulled his perimeter in tighter, concentrating his forces around the crossroads itself. He also delayed the scheduled movement of his horse-drawn supply wagons, which were packed and ready to go. This was Yannick's first major strategic victory. He had halted the enemy's operational momentum with nothing but illusion. But the strain on the lone pole was immense. The afternoon of the 28th passed in a haze of exhaustion and hypervigilance. He dared not sleep. He moved constantly, his uniform torn and caked in mud, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of rest. He survived on snatched mouthfuls of bread and muddy water from streams. Every sound made him jump. Every distant German voice was a potential discovery. The weight of his isolation was a physical pressure. He spoke to himself in whispers, rehearsing his next move, fighting off the despair that whispered he was just one man. And this was a suicide mission. Yet, with each passing hour, he grew more cunning, more attuned to the rhythm of the German unit. He learned their patrol schedules, their sentry change times. As dusk fell, he prepared for his most audacious stunt yet. Using the last of the captured flares and 2 more grenades, he planned to simulate a coordinated night attack. At 2,200 hours, under a moonless, starless sky, Yannick struck from a position north of the crossroads. He fired his last signal flare, a white star cluster that burst brilliantly, illuminating the swirling ground fog in an eerie, celestial glow. As German shouts of alarm rang out, he sprinted to a position east, armed both a potato masher and an RGD-33 grenade, and lobbed them in quick succession into an empty stretch of woods near a German mortar position. The twin explosions, flash and thunder in the night, triggered a panicked response. A German MG-42 opened up, its tracer round stitching long, fiery lines into the darkness, blindly hosing down the area. This, in turn, prompted other nervous German positions to fire. For 5 full minutes, a furious, one-sided firefight erupted across the German perimeter as they fired at phantoms, each position convinced the others were engaging a real enemy. Yannick, lying flat in a foxhole he dug earlier, listened to the symphony of chaos he had composed. He allowed himself a grim, exhausted smile. The battalion was now completely spooked, jumpy, and burning through precious ammunition. His army of ghosts had grown in their minds to battalion strength. But the physical and mental cost was staggering. He had not slept in over 36 hours. His hands trembled from adrenaline crash and fatigue. He was running low on ammunition, food, and hope. The crisis was no longer just about the German battalion. It was about whether Yannick Krzysztof's body and mind could hold out for one more day. August 29th, the day of the planned German withdrawal. Yannick awoke, if his fitful, unconscious moments could be called sleep, to a dull, throbbing headache and a deep-seated chill that had settled into his bones. The fog had lifted, replaced by a bleak, overcast sky. The visibility was better, which was both a curse and an opportunity. He checked his remaining arsenal. 11 rounds for the Mosin, 1 magazine for the MP40, his Luger pistol with a full 8-round magazine, and 1 final, precious RGD-33 grenade. He was out of flares, out of food, and nearly out of time. He knew from the captured map that if the German battalion stuck to its schedule, they would begin to move out at dusk. He had to convince them that moving was more dangerous than staying. He had to create a tangible, devastating event that would paralyze them with fear. Studying the German perimeter through his scope from a distant tree line, he identified a key vulnerability. The battalion's 2 Pa-K-40 anti-tank guns and their ammunition wagon were positioned in a small clearing at the edge of the woods, covering the eastern approach road. They were guarded, but the guards looked as exhausted and nervous as everyone else. If he could destroy or disable those guns, it would be a catastrophic loss for a retreating unit expecting Soviet armor pursuit. It would also be a concrete, undeniable act of sabotage that would scream large, skilled partisan team. But the approach was open, covered by at least 2 machine gun nests. A direct assault was impossible. He needed a diversion so complete, so absorbing, that every German eye would be drawn away from the gun park. His plan was breathtakingly risky. He would offer himself as bait. At 1400 hours, Yannick made his final preparations. He filled his canteen from a stream one last time. He checked the action on his Mosin, ensuring the last rounds were clean. He then began a long, slow, deliberate stalk towards the southern sector of the German line, the area furthest from the anti-tank guns. He moved with a hunter's infinite patience, inch by inch, using every scrap of cover. By 15:30, he was in position, just 150 yards from a German listening post manned by 3 soldiers. He took a deep, steadying breath. This was the point of no return. He raised the MP40, took aim at the group, and fired a short, controlled 3-round burst. One soldier cried out and fell. The other 2 scrambled for their weapons and returned fire instantly. Yannick didn't retreat. He fired another burst, purposely kicking up dirt near their position, shouting in Polish at the top of his lungs, "Forward! Attack! For Poland!" He then broke cover, running laterally along the tree line, firing the MP40 from the hip in sporadic bursts, making as much noise as humanly possible. The response was electric. Alarm whistles shrieked. The entire southern section of the German perimeter erupted in fire. A company strength force, believing they were finally facing the long-expected partisan assault, began to form up for a counterattack. Officers shouted orders. Soldiers fixed bayonets. Every bit of German attention and combat power was now magnetized to the south. Yannick, his heart hammering against his ribs, threw his now empty MP40 into the bushes and began to run, not away, but north, in a wide, desperate arc, using the cacophony of the German response to mask his movement. He ran until his lungs burned, weaving through trees, leaping over logs, the sounds of the fierce but pointless German assault fading behind him. After 10 minutes of all-out sprinting, he arrived, gasping and drenched in sweat, at a small rise overlooking the anti-tank gun position, just as he had hoped. It was now lightly guarded. Only 2 men remained, both looking anxiously towards the sound of the battle to the south. This was the moment. Every second of fatigue, every hour of fear, every ounce of his will coalesced into this single action. He steadied his breathing, raised the Mosin, and settled the crosshairs on the soldier standing nearest to the ammunition wagon. He exhaled, squeezed. The shot rang out. The soldier dropped. The second guard spun, raising his rifle. Yannick worked the bolt smoothly, fired again. A miss. The German dove behind the gun shield. Yannick had no time for a sniper duel. He grabbed his last grenade, pulled the pin, and with a prayer, hurled it in a high, looping arc towards the ammunition wagon. He then turned and ran, putting as many thick tree trunks between himself and the guns as possible. He counted the seconds in his head. 1, 2, 3. The grenade detonated. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then, a secondary, world-ending explosion tore the afternoon apart. The grenade had ignited some of the ready ammunition, which in turn set off the main wagon load of 75mm shells. A colossal fireball rose above the trees, followed by a rolling thunderclap of sound that shook the ground. Shrapnel and pieces of the Pa-K-40 guns whirred through the air like deadly shards of metal rain. The entire German battalion, still oriented south, now stared in horror to the north at the pillar of black smoke marking the destruction of their crucial anti-tank capability. In that instant, Yannick's ghost army became real. In the German command post, Major Schreiber's worst fears were confirmed. They were not just harassed by partisans. They were under a coordinated, multi-pronged attack by a force capable of simultaneous diversionary assaults and precision sabotage. The loss of the guns was a disaster. Convinced his battalion was on the verge of being surrounded and annihilated, Schreiber made the fateful decision. He radioed higher command, reporting heavy partisan contact and critical losses. He requested, and was granted, permission to abandon the Milano position immediately, not at dusk, but right now, in daylight, a full 6 hours early. The order was given. A fighting retreat. Every man for himself. Rendezvous at the river crossing. The battalion's cohesion was shattered. What began as an orderly withdrawal degenerated into a confused, panicked exodus. Yannick, watching from a distance as the gray-clad soldiers streamed west in disarray, knew he had done it. His 3-day feint had broken their plan and broken their nerve. The immediate aftermath was one of surreal quiet, broken only by the crackle of the still burning ammunition wagon. Yannick remained hidden, watching for over an hour as the last of the German stragglers disappeared into the forest to the west. Only then, as the adrenaline finally began to ebb, did the full weight of his ordeal crash down upon him. He was trembling uncontrollably, his body a map of cuts, bruises, and exhaustion. He stumbled into the abandoned German position, now littered with discarded equipment, empty ration tins, and the signs of a hurried flight. He found an untouched can of meat and ate it slowly, mechanically. He then gathered what he could: a fresh canteen of water, a German medical kit, and a working Mauser rifle with ammunition to replace his empty weapons. His primary goal now was to survive long enough to report. He moved east, towards the last known Soviet lines. Late in the evening of August 29th, a forward scout patrol from the advancing 2nd Infantry Regiment, his own unit, spotted a ragged, solitary figure emerging from the trees, waving a white cloth. It was Yannick. He was barely recognizable, hollow-eyed and moving like an old man. He was escorted to the regimental command post, where he delivered a coherent, detailed report of the German positions, strength, and, most importantly, their panicked, premature retreat. His information was immediately relayed to divisional artillery and mobile units. The next morning, Soviet Su-76 self-propelled guns and a company of Polish infantry, advancing along the road from Milano, encountered not a defended rearguard, but a scattered, demoralized column of Germans caught in the open near the Vipers River crossings. Without their anti-tank guns and with their command structure fractured, they were swiftly overwhelmed. Over 200 German soldiers were captured, along with dozens of wagons, and the remaining SKFZ 251 half-track, and vast quantities of supplies that had been abandoned in the rush. Yannick Krzysztof's personal war was over. He was hospitalized for exhaustion and minor injuries for 2 weeks. His story, initially met with disbelief, was corroborated by prisoner interrogations and the captured German map case he had retrieved. German prisoners spoke of a brigade of forest devils and elite Polish commandos who had terrorized them for 3 days. The strategic impact was significant. The destruction of this rearguard allowed Soviet and Polish forces to advance their timetable by a critical 24 hours, securing the western bank of the Vipers River ahead of schedule and tightening the noose on other retreating German formations. For his actions, Corporal Jan Krzysztof was personally decorated by the Polish High Command with the Virtuti Militari, Silver Cross, Poland's highest military award for valor in the face of the enemy. The citation specifically mentioned his unparalleled personal initiative, strategic deception, and heroic endurance behind enemy lines. Yannick survived the war, returning to his family farm near Lublin. He rarely spoke of his 3 days in the forest, as he called it. He lived a quiet life, passing away in 1998. His story, buried in regimental archives for decades, stands as a profound testament to the power of the individual human spirit in the vast, impersonal machinery of total war. It proves that courage is not merely the absence of fear, but the will to act in spite of it. That a single, determined mind, armed with nothing but ingenuity and intimate knowledge of the land, can outmaneuver and defeat a battalion not through brute force, but through the weaponization of illusion. He did not fight an army with an army. He fought them with a ghost story he made real, bullet by bullet, grenade by grenade, step by step. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to War Legend Recorded as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.